Now, in the latest evidence of growing tension between Britain and China, the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has announced that the UK is suspending its extradition treaty with Hong Kong. It's in response to Beijing's imposition of a new national security law, which is aimed at stopping any anti-communist activities in Hong Kong. The UK has already offered residency rights to up to 3 million Hong Kong residents, but China has today accused the UK of brutal meddling in its internal affairs. Now, back in 1997, the UK handed back control of Hong Kong to China after 150 years of British rule. It followed that joint declaration back in 1984, which said that Hong Kong's economic and political freedoms would be maintained for 50 years after the handover. But now the UK, along with the US and the European Union, is accusing Beijing of undermining that principle of one country, two systems. They claim that the new security law violates the terms of the 1984 agreement, especially in relation to freedom of speech and Hong Kong's independent judicial system. Our political editor Laura Kuenssberg has the story.
Will the UK send someone back to this? A new law in Hong Kong's tightened China's grip on the streets and brought fresh danger for those fighting for democracy.
It's a very tense situation. Many people already fled Hong Kong, escaped from Hong Kong, have sought political asylum overseas in many countries.
For more than 30 years, if someone now in the UK was suspected of a crime, Hong Kong could ask the government to hand them over under the extradition deal. But now some forms of protest could bring prosecution. Not anymore.
And the government has decided to suspend the extradition treaty immediately and indefinitely. There remains considerable uncertainty about the way in which the new national security law will be enforced. I would just say this: the United Kingdom is watching, and the whole world is watching.
The Foreign Secretary also banned the sale of any arms to Hong Kong, but despite a long list of concerns about China's behaviour, stopped short of individual sanctions.
This must mark the start of a more strategic approach to China, based on an ethical approach to foreign policy and an end to the naivety of the golden era years. And if it does, he can be assured that he will have our full support on this side of the House.
Even in advance, before it was formal, China accused Britain of brutal meddling in its affairs. The shine's most definitely come off since the days when the Queen offered President Xi a place in her golden carriage. Keen to share in China's soaring economy, the government extended the regal welcome. The pint in the then Prime Minister's local. 5 years feels like 15. There is alarm among MPs about China's creeping aggression, whether brutality in Hong Kong with its historic links to the UK, terrible abuses of the Uyghur Muslims who live in northwest China, or unease about the country's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. But is it Britain's attitude or China's behaviour that's really changed? The former National Security Advisor puts that down to President Xi.
I think Xi Jinping has a much more nationalist, aggressive, assertive approach to using Chinese power. Previous leaders were more cautious. I think it was a reasonable policy at the time to try to build economic relations with China. They are, after all, going to be one of the world's major powers for a whole generation. What has changed is the capacity to work with a China that is now much more nationalistic.
Balancing condemnation and economic cooperation gets harder. Ministers repeat they want to work with modern China, but the UK is not only interested in playing nice. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, in Hong Kong, pro-democracy campaigners who fought against the introduction of the security law say they're being pursued on a daily basis by the Chinese authorities. Our correspondent Danny Vincent has been speaking to one of them about the impact of the new law on everyday life in Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is a city facing rapid change. The implementation of a new law imposed by Beijing has given the Communist Party more control over this semi-autonomous territory, almost overnight. Joshua Wong is the face of Hong Kong's activist movement. Today, he registered to stand in the upcoming election. But since the introduction of the national security law, he believes he's been under increasing surveillance. He fears the authorities are building a case against him, and the net is closing in. Who do you think they were?
Maybe Chinese agent. I don't think they might be police.
His greatest fear is imprisonment, not in Hong Kong, but in Beijing. Breaking the national security law in this city could mean trial in the mainland. The national security law has transformed this global financial hub. It was promised certain freedoms for 50 years after it was returned to China. Freedom of assembly, an independent judicial system, freedom of the press. Many fear the new law undermines these rights. Pro-democracy activists say the very nature of this city has already changed. The new national security law is so wide-ranging it could affect people from many walks of life. Some say that may well be the point, to shock Hong Kong residents into silence. Since the law was introduced, political books critical of Beijing have been ordered off of the shelves and removed from libraries. It's had a chilling effect.
Publishers are really worried about the national security law. There's a red line, but it's not only very vague, but the line's also moving. We used to feel as long as we didn't cross the line, we were safe.
The Communist Party says the national security law was necessary to restore order after a year of protest.
The law on safeguarding national security in Hong Kong is a reassurance for a fresh start for our city. For us, much work remains to be done. We not only have to improve Hong Kong's system, but also have to nurture the younger generation of Hong Kong and teach them the sense of country and patriotism.
Hong Kong is coming to terms with a new reality. The international community must now decide how to redefine its relationship with Hong Kong and also Beijing. Danny Vincent, BBC News, Hong Kong.